Troy Redstone, welcome to the Fiduciary You podcast. Thank you so much for being a guest today.
Well, sure, Josh. Thanks for having me.
I'm actually really excited about this episode. I'm always excited about episodes, but the fact that you are a fellow author and of two books. The first you wrote, I think, in 2019 called Repurposement, Experiencing the Financial Freedom to Start Living on Purpose Today. And then your most recent book, which came out a couple of months ago, I think in October, which is 401k Architecture, Design a Plan that Serves Your Purpose and Your People. I actually had a chance to read part of 401k Architecture. I thought you did actually an awesome job.
Thank you.
So really excited to kind of talk about that today. You are the founder of PhD Retirement Consulting, and
right.
Which has PhD as an acronym. So for listeners that may not know who you are or who your firm is, why don't you talk a little bit about what PhD is and what it represents and kind of the philosophy that you have when you're dealing with plans?
Sure. Well, it is an acronym. PhD stands for Plan Health Design. And so we believe that if you have a healthy plan, it should naturally produce healthy outcomes. When I was first getting into the business, I was just so sick of hearing about, the 3 F's: fund, fees, and fiduciary. And it's just the idea that, you could have fantastic funds and I guess low fees. But if only half your people are participating, it's broken, and there's a whole lot of plans out there that probably ought to just be taken out back and put down. I mean, they're sick. The retirement rate's not high. People are not retiring well. So it is based on this idea that, a healthy plan, what does a healthy plan look like? What does a good plan look like? Well, it actually helps people retire well, as simplistic as that sounds. You can no more have, bad fruit from a good tree than a good fruit from a bad tree. So it's kind of this idea that if it's healthy, it should naturally produce healthy outcomes. So we work really, really hard on just building healthy plans, but designing and building healthy plans.
Yeah, and I think the connotation there, which is a good one, and a similar philosophy that I've had throughout my career, is that a lot of times, especially as it relates to funds and investments, so much of those outcomes are outside of fiduciary's control, and really taking the kind of approach around plan health, around plan design, around those decisions, is it's really focusing on the things you can control instead of the things that you can't control. One of the things you mentioned that I think is something that I wrote a lot about in my book, my most recent book, The Fiduciary Formula, is really around plan design. And one of the things I had talked about, I kind of quoted the Apostle Peter 2,000 years ago. He said that love covers a multitude of sins. And what I had said was that the savings rate, when it comes to financial planning, covers a multitude of, financial sins, and that you can't invest your way out of a savings deficit. And, things like savings rates, if you design your plan in the right way, actually you can influence much more than you can what investment outcomes are going to look like. So it sounds like you take a similar philosophy.
Well, we do. And you were just talking about, plan sponsors controlling what they can control. Let me just tee off that a little bit. There's this idea of this empowering message if it's couched correctly and framed correctly. But we are always trying to communicate to employees the thing that matters the least is the investments themselves, which they don't really have a lot of control over that. They're not going to sit in that boardroom and figure out which of these, 30,000 mutual funds are we going to choose. It's already been decided for them. The trustees of the plan, perhaps if their advisors are 338 fiduciary, that discretion was exercised before they even entered the boardroom. But the investments are already chosen. That can feel like a disempowering type of a deal. Like that's out of my control. So we're going overboard in communicating to employees the things that are in their control, like how much they save and whether or not they save, and even like when they start. The things that are in control are the things that make the biggest difference. And it's not even close. Like it really all comes down to, how much gas you put in the tank. Everybody wants to focus on the investments. And there's been a number of studies. I'm sure you're aware of them as well. Just the studies on, which matters more, how much or where. And obviously, when matters the most, probably like when you start. But a very close second is how much, and a very, very, very distant third is where. And so we're communicating that message to employees and trying to help them understand this is empowering. Like you're in direct control over the lever that actually makes the biggest difference if you pull it. And so that's hopefully an encouraging message. And I think we've borne that out really even in our results. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It was interesting. In the fiduciary formula, I cited a study that Dimensional had done, and they just looked at what was really fascinating and scary at the same time. Was they had run projections around retirement outcomes for something like 10,000, individuals, and the time was absolutely critical. Someone starting at 25 versus 35 versus 45, every 5 to 10 years that they waited, their savings rates had to go up by something like 5 to 7% per year. So very quickly you can start to see that, it becomes untenable. And you think about plan health, in a lot of ways, getting people into plans, getting them in early, getting them in at sufficient savings rates. It's kind of like, being able to detect, call it cancer. In my book, I talk about my mom she's almost a 50-year ovarian cancer survivor. But part of the reason that, she kind of blew the odds out of the water was they found it very early, and she was in her late 20s. And so the fact that her age helped her, and the fact that they detected it right at the very outset, meant that the treatment didn't necessarily have to be as aggressive as if they would have caught it if she was older, or if they would have caught it at a later stage. And so I think, to your point, getting access for people, but getting them in early and getting them in sufficiently, can go a long ways. You can overcome bad fees and high fees and bad investments. Not ideal, but that savings rate is really the kind of the key driver there.
Well, and it drives us towards more holistic consulting and more. And I almost want to not use the term because it's being used so much by folks meaning really something different even than what I mean, but financial wellness, right? So that, getting more people to participate and more people to save more money is the key. Going in front of a group of employees and telling them they need to save 1% more when they're up to their eyeballs in debt doesn't work real well either. And so it's a very holistic approach. The consulting is, it's fun. It's messy at times. It's not a blanket answer for everybody. We'll tell some employees, because they have that high deductible on their medical insurance, and so they have the HSA, that really the wisest thing for them is to contribute up to the employee match on the 401k, not a penny more. Max out the HSA, and then once you've maxed that out, come back and max out the 401k. And I don't sell 401ks, Josh, so it really does come down to what's in the best interest of plan participants, which I know we all are supposed to give lip service to, but we really do tell some employees, don't put more money in the 401k. That's easy to do when we're working in most cases for a flat fee. So in most cases, we're not driven just by putting more money in the 401k, but it helps us to tell that one employee who's up to their eyeballs in debt, you need to reduce those credit cards. You need to get a handle on your finances before you just overload the 401k. And we tell the other person, you've got an HSA, make sure you're maximizing that. So it's a message that we can give without conflicts of interest. So that's fun also.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had mentioned, you wrote your first book in 2019, Repurposement. Maybe talk a little bit about what was that book about? Why did you write?
Well, sure. And one thing to say, I guess, is we wrote one book pre-pandemic and one book post-pandemic, and the world has changed. But in a larger sense, I started writing a book back when we actually started the firm in 2013. I started writing a book then, and the original title, it would have been pretty boring. Only people like you and I would have read it, but it was like how to make a retirement plan work, or how to build a healthy retirement plan. Nobody would have picked that up. But I started writing that book, and I realized pretty early on that I had two distinct messages. And the first message was going to be to the employees, and the second message was to the employer. And the first message to the employees was pretty simple. It kind of wrote itself. It's everything I've been teaching for years and years and years. I kind of cut my teeth in this industry doing retirement education. So I kind of came up working on the record keeper side, doing retirement education, coming in front of a group of employees and trying to convince them that their 401k was a big fat deal, and hey, you were missing out on free money, and all that kind of stuff. And so all those illustrations and stories and anecdotal evidence that we've just accumulated over the years, basically everything we teach employees, that book wrote itself. That was easy. And but we came up with this title, Repurposement, because somewhere in the process, and this is going to sound a little bit weird, considering what I do for a living. Somewhere in the process, I started almost, I guess, lacking a vision for what retirement is. In other words, I'm in the retirement plan industry, but I started wondering if I even really believe in the idea of retirement. So hold on before you just cut me off. Let me explain. Yeah, that's a really short podcast. No, retire is this military term that literally means to fall back and do nothing. And I read a study back in 2012, I think it was, that talked about how the number one activity for most retirees, I mean, it just was a whole list of things that they were polled on, and you could check which one you spend time doing. And the one that everybody did, or everybody spent a significant amount of time doing, was watching TV. So, I mean, Josh, our vision of retirement is about as inspiring as a lazy boy in a remote control. Like, why would you sacrifice? Why would you save for that kind of a future? So I really began to just lose faith in this idea of retirement, this idea that you work a long, hard time and you accumulate wealth and you accumulate experience and all this kind of stuff. And then when you're probably most valuable to the world with resources, and not just financial, but resources, time as well, you're most valuable to the world, and then we put you in the back pasture and you do nothing. That's just a weird concept to me. I don't know that I really agree with the idea. I like the idea more of repurposement, not retirement. Josh, I know we visited before, and everyone knows your story, but I'm not trying to retell your story. But without putting words in your mouth, it sounds to me like you've been repurposed, like you worked a long, hard time, and then decided at one point, I have the financial means to stop punching the clock to do something that I don't find as much meaning in. I'd like to go and chase something that really is more meaningful and gives me purpose. And so this idea of repurposement is it's life-giving. It's this idea that you can be financially able, as soon as you sense what your purpose and calling is, financially able to pivot and chase the thing that really gives you purpose. So it's fun for us to kind of think about how we hopefully are helping people first steward and eliminate debt and get a handle of their money, build wealth for the future, but also with a purpose in mind. So that's repurposement.
No, I love that philosophy and that idea. There's I don't know if you've ever heard of the author Patrick Lencioni. He wrote 5 Dysfunctions of a Team and 5 Temptations of a CEO. He's written a bunch of books. I haven't ever seen one of them on my bookshelf right now. But he writes these leadership fables. Just a phenomenal kind of corporate strategist, and he actually has a new concept out. In fact, I actually I'm going to put it in the show notes. It's incredibly powerful. I found a podcast of his, and it was called Working Genius. And there was an episode about, he said it was called You Should Retire Now. And I was like, okay, what is this all about? And I listened to it. And this idea that he's come up with Working Genius is that there's essentially 6 types of what he calls working genius. And it's the acronym is called WIDGET. The genius of wonder, the genius of innovation, the genius of discernment, the genius of galvanizing, the genius of I forget what the third one was, or the next to the last one was, and the genius of tenacity. So I forget what the E was. Maybe it'll come back to me. But the idea is that everybody has up to two types of working genius. They have two that they're not good at all, and they have two where they're kind of capable, but they're not real genius. And his idea with this "you should retire now" was figure out your work genius, because when you do, it gives life to you, and it doesn't feel like when you're working in your area of genius, it doesn't feel like feel like work. It feels like play. And they have a whole assessment. I took it to kind of figure out what my two kind of working geniuses are. But it really gave me kind of like what you're talking about with repurposement. It actually helped me kind of embrace the way that I'm wired, and this idea that, people think that wealth buys you stuff, and it certainly does up to a point. But just filling your life with stuff, it's like a drug, right? Early on, you don't need a lot in order to kind of like get the high, but the more you use, the shorter and shorter, those adrenaline hits are, and you need more. And I think what wealth buys you is it buys you freedom and it buys you time. And to your point, I just look at history. I was a history major in college. Retirement is it's a new concept within the last, call it 100 years. Like before that, you had folks, like you said, that were in kind of the primes of their life. Like people worked their whole life. They had utility. And I just love the quote that you said, which I'm going to put in the show notes, of, the vision we have for retirement is a lazy boy and a remote. And this idea of repurposement that you wrote about is really recasting that vision of, hopefully, through healthy plans and good outcomes, right? Bearing good fruit within your plan is something you talk about a lot for employers, is that puts people in a position where they then can kind of, in a life-giving way, have the financial freedom to kind of offer their gifts, to the world, and pursuing things that really give life to them. And I've actually read a number of studies where you've got people who, when you just sit on the couch and you watch TV, like that impacts your life expectancy. It impacts your engagement mentally. And I know you're a big behavioral finance and research guy.
It's
so
interesting
what's your
because,
thought from that perspective?
we write repurposement. Repurposement comes out. Lots of different employees are grabbing hold of it. It's doing pretty well. People are reading it and such. And then the world falls apart with pandemic, right? Here's what's interesting about what happened over the last, let's say 18 months or almost 2 years. It sounded like fun at first. Sitting at home, doing nothing, binging on Netflix. That got old really, really fast. And as you know, a lot of people began really struggling with mental health. And I think that there's this intertwined with this idea of purpose, not just happiness, but purpose, is this idea that I believe we were created to create. Like we need to have this sense of what are we doing that's purposeful and productive and everything like that. And there's all kinds of studies that show that those who retire early sometimes don't live as long because they found so much purpose in what they were actually doing. So now it's kind of like, you talk to some folks who are retired and they're kind of like, I'm not even sure. Is it Tuesday? What day of the week is it? And I mean, maybe the only day that seems different than the others is Sunday if they go to church. Every day is the same. They're kind of unmoored and it's untethered, and it's not a good thing. So I think it's really important to be tied to something that we find meaning and find purpose in. There was even, there's a story. I'm sure you've heard it as well as a history buff, but something that happened in Nazi Germany, sometimes in concentration camps. They would have some of these folks. In addition to just the security of the place and such, they would break their will, and it would really reduce the amount of people even trying to escape, because they would have them every morning get up early and start digging holes. And then as the day was waning, they would begin to refill in the holes. And so it's not just that it was hard labor, but it was meaningless labor. It wasn't digging a hole because there was a latrine or something that was going to serve some purpose. They would dig a hole, fill it in, dig a hole, fill it in, dig a hole, fill it in. So many days you do that. And then after a while, it's like everything's meaningless, right? And so it moves into, and that's what I think we dealt with over the last 18 months. There's so many people struggling with mental health. And so I think it's challenging. Some retirees, unfortunately, are not a lot different than folks I've known who are, younger, should be gainfully employed, but they were laid off. They lost their job. That's a whole challenging kind of a deal as well, because you find your identity in what you do. And now if you're unemployed, you're really struggling with just kind of trying to hold it together. So, but there's retirees that are like that. They're supposed to be in their golden years, the happy years now. They're not, they weren't fired. They retired on their own. Why aren't they happier? So I think it's important to try to connect meaning and purpose to what we're actually doing. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I know for myself, kind of what I went through leaving Greenspring. It's interesting. It's interesting that you bring that up. Is that so much of our identity is tied up in what we do, and what we do isn't actually who we are. I think you're seeing some of the impact of that with the Great Resignation, right? You're having people, and quite frankly, I went through that. Like through COVID, is I started to ask myself, like, okay, like what's the second half of life going to look like? Could it look different? Do I want it to look different? And so, I just love this idea that you came up with repurposement. And like you said, the audience was really more of, individuals, employees from that perspective.
And then I'm sorry, that's where you were going as well. And then the second book really, slightly because of the pandemic, I guess there was some downtime. And so the ability to pick up the second half of what I'd been working on. But, it's really awesome that it worked out the way it did, because if I had written this second book, what I now call the second book, if I'd written that years ago, it would have been a different book. So I wrote it during this worldwide pandemic. And what I did, Josh, was I started contacting employers that are known for being great places to work. And so they always show up on these lists of places that people love working. And so I reached out to some of those employers and I said, what are you doing? Like, how are you holding it together? What's going on with your employee benefits? And there were so many inspiring stories. And it's really the first section of the book as to all of these employers, business owners, business leaders who were loving on their people and really just kind of giving a little bit extra, even during a difficult time, which I think endears so much allegiance to the team. Employee, everyone's hiring, right? So everyone's going through this challenge of trying to find people, and you offer things like 401ks to attract and retain and whatever. But employees are not generally leaving because they can make $1 more an hour across the street. They're leaving because of things like culture. They're leaving because of things like maybe the benefits. And so it was inspiring to me to talk to these business leaders all over the country, some of whom were clients, but some of whom were not. They were just folks that we ran across that were listed as top employers, and we began asking them how they're managing all of this. And pretty much to a person, they were kind of saying, it's not like, we sacrifice profits for, purpose or whatever. But really, we're trying to balance things out to where, we want to design our benefits and serve our people with a sense that serves our purpose and our profits. Like, it's not one or the other. And it really is. And so the second book, which is in simplistic fashion, the first book is for employees. The second book is for employers. The first book is how to make your money work. And the second book is how to build a plan that helps your employees make their money work. But
I thought actually and not to cut you off, but I really liked that about your book. It's a really good read. I think you're a good writer. You're gifted with kind of concepts and like you used a lot of this with this kind of 401k architecture. You use kind of this kind of construction methodology as it kind of carried through. But I do think one of the cool aspects of the book is, in journalism, they talk about like, don't bury the lead, right?
I did.
The fact that, and I know that originally
my
I think
editors
you had those
did, the
stories
publisher
in the
did.
back and
They were smarter than I was.
moved them to the front. Yeah. Well, they
did.
They made it. They repurposed, right, the structure of the book. But I actually thought that was a really cool way to kind of set the stage. And so often it's about kind of casting the right vision, and I think that's what you did with that book and with those stories. And I agree with you. I think much like in just the plan space, was that you found out if you were an employer through COVID and the pandemic, you found out whether or not you had a good retirement plan advisor. Right. But I also think that through COVID and the pandemic, you found out as an employee whether you had a good employer, right? That really cared about you. And just like a retirement plan, right? If you think about PhD, right? Is you design a really good retirement plan. Ultimately there are things out of your control, right? You have to create the right environment with your plan and kind of prepare the soil so that, a good crop will grow from it. I think you do the same thing with culture as employers. Ultimately there are things out of your control, but you create the environment. And so I think those stories were really kind of an enjoyable read. And as I read them, I was like, oh, that would be a company that that's inspiring. I'd want to work for that company. So you just like cold called, like obviously you had some of them were your clients, some of them weren't. Did you just like pick up the phone and be like, hey, I'm writing this book. I read you were on a top, 30 employers list or whatever. And I just love to interview your CEO
absolutely.
And find out like
it was,
what makes your company tick.
How do I say this? It was an interesting. I've gotten one so far.
Did you get any clients from these companies that were in your book? Okay. All right. There you go.
It's the long
prospecting,
game.
Maybe not
Josh, it's the long game.
Primary goal. But,
I would encourage anyone who wants to find some 401k prospects to interview and write a whole book and then 2 years later close the deal, right? It's a long process. So that's not why you start writing it. And I certainly had to make the point. So that we don't get in trouble with our friends at the SEC about testimonials or whatever. I had to make the point that a lot of the folks I interviewed were not clients. So it was not clients giving testimonials about me. It was plan sponsors talking about their people, talking about their culture. And it was really interesting. Yeah. I mean, some of those places were like, those would be fun places to work. So.
What were some of the lessons you learned in interviewing these companies? Like, were there any key lessons, nuggets of wisdom?
I was
as you heard
I
these
think,
stories,
just by
what was
this
most
idea
inspiring to you?
that some of the things that they don't teach you in business school, like how you care for and you love your people and things like that. I think those things carry a whole lot more merit and really help you further down the road. I mean, my undergraduate degrees were actually journalism. So I was a writer. I was a journalist professionally. So journalism and behavioral psychology. So I didn't go through the normal business schools, but I don't imagine there's a lot of business schools that teach you about loving your people. I was pleasantly surprised. Maybe it's just that I talked to the right people, but I was pleasantly surprised by how seriously most of those business leaders take the stewardship of their people. To a person, several of them kind of spoke about this idea that they really feel like a mantle of responsibility to steward. They're responsible for these people. They're responsible for their families. I was touched, I think, because we've all had crummy bosses. I've had crummy bosses. And so it's nice to think about someone who really takes seriously, like leading the team. That shepherding thing, I don't know if that's normal. But at least for us, and it wasn't a large enough, population to draw any type of, large evidence or results. But at least for us, the experience was that those who have really great culture do take shepherding their people seriously. Maybe it's just the folks we talk to.
Yeah, and what's interesting is you kind of carry that forward, right? In many ways, even not more related to their people and their culture, they I think those types of companies and that type of that leadership group really internalizes what it means to be a fiduciary.
Absolutely.
Right? Which at its core is you're putting the interests of others before your own. You're serving others' needs first. Now that they're probably not carrying over the they're not thinking about it in terms of ERISA or anything like that, but it is that fiduciary mindset, which probably then carries over to how they run their plans, that they if they're wired like outside the plan in terms of how they govern and run their company and how they view their people and their responsibility to their people, you would suspect that then.
Well, the interesting thing is that you run across people who really care. That's always a good baseline place for starting the conversation. You run across people that really, really care, but they've begun to accept broken as normal. So they say, yeah, we've got a really great place here, and da-da-da. And so we start talking about the 401k, and maybe their 401k has like 69 or 70% participation. But they say, but we're in manufacturing, and some of those guys they're not making a ton. And so we're unique. And I've heard that a million times. We're unique. Our people are just not going to. Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. Yeah, I was working with a really large, group one time that was, a lot of folks that were really, really low paid, and they just thought, well, this is just kind of the norm. I mean, we're not. We can never really expect better results. And there were some things we did with plan design, like automatic enrollment, automatic escalation. But it's more than just that. I mean, there's a lot of education involved as well to undergird that message, the communication around that, to help people not opt out. But we ended up having we had thousands of people automatically enrolled in this facility where they didn't think it was necessarily possible. They were shocked. It was
shocked.
It was really beyond their expectation, which probably takes me to the kind of people that we work really well with. I mean, we work really well with folks that really, really care. I'd like to think every employer cares, but we work we love working with companies where it's like a family-owned company, maybe, and the owner's name's on the side of the building, and the people that work there are like family. I mean, just to give you an example, even if we're working for a low fee or a flat fee, and we've renegotiated low costs for services and things like that, still, if you got a match and you go from 59% participation to 97% participation, which is a normal story for us, it costs the employer more. So the employer is now putting more money in the plan because it's expensive match. But I've got dozens of those types of clients that can't say enough good things about us because we're putting more money in the pockets of their employees, and they love it.
And they want to give. In a lot of cases,
Sure.
How often do you see plans where employees aren't taking full advantage of the match, and the employer, well, what do we do? Because we want them to. It's not like you get some employers who are like, well, let's not do a true up because it's going to save us on the P&L. But I think a lot of companies, they're like, look, we want people to take advantage. We just don't know how. I would go back to the fact too that you said that the new, just the normal, I kind of would describe it as an acute injury versus chronic pain. Right? If I break my arm, I've got this really acute pain, right? Mm-hmm. I go to the emergency room, they set my arm, they put it in a cast, it addresses that issue. But chronic pain is different. Chronic pain, a lot of times you don't feel right, but you just don't. I mean, I experienced that when I left Greenspring, actually. I'd been running so hard for so long. And I was under probably a lot more stress, a lot more fatigue physically than I was even aware. And it wasn't until I kind of unplugged and rehabilitated for a period of time, because I had a pretty rough ride out of it, just very, very amicable and still very good friends with my, my former partners and coworkers. But it was hard for me emotionally. I actually dealt with some real, I always thought mental health was really more just kind of like suck it up. I just kind of grinded through it. That was probably more my athletic background. But mentally, it was a lot. Like, I dealt with some mental health challenges coming out of Greenspring, because so much of my identity and my status was tied up in that company. And it wasn't until I was able to get some space and some time that some of that stress, that fatigue, as it dissipated, and I was like, I feel better. And it's like, I didn't know how much kind of chronic pain I was in. It just was my new normal. I'm like, well, this is just kind of what it's like, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And it's funny that you mentioned that about employers. I think the other thing is, as an industry, I think a lot of cases we are enabling of that to employers. They have a 69% or a 70% participation range, let's say. And as an industry, a lot of times we lack the courage to say to them, they're like, you can do better. We want to tell them, oh, it's okay. You're in manufacturing, like that. That's kind of normal, as opposed to more of casting a better vision. I don't know if you found that as well, but I think as an industry, a lot of times, because we're more concerned with like keeping clients and not rocking the boat, we're unwilling to kind of confront and say, you know what, like, you're here.
Right. It does, and you
here,
touched on something
we're going to show you the way
that was troubling me as I was writing the book, and I don't know the final result of this yet. And that was, how do you get people that don't care to start caring? I don't know. I mean, I'm hopeful. I guess my prayer is that the stories in the beginning of the book are inspiring. The roadmap through the book, 401k Architecture, shows that it's not that complicated. And if they realize, I mean, it's not purely altruistic, right? I mean, if you're helping your employees retire on time, it's going to cost you less over time. You don't have folks working beyond their most productive years. You don't have folks that are driving up your health insurance because they're still at the company and you wish they'd kind of retired already. So that's going to help you. It's going to help your company culture to reduce financial stress. So it's not purely altruistic. I mean, you are helping your company by helping people to get on track financially. Yep. And I think those companies that we interviewed, for instance, that are really top performing companies that are not having the trouble filling open positions in this environment are the ones that take care of their people. Now, that being said, in most cases, we walk through the door and we're engaged with a new client in our consulting firm because they care. And so that's why we're probably talking to them. And so can you find someone who really doesn't give a rip and help them to start caring? I don't know.
I actually don't think you can. Based on my experience over the years, is that there was a court case, an ERISA ruling years ago, and the judge actually wrote in the ruling, because the defendants were trying to make the case like, well, we had the best of intentions. And there's a really famous line from the ruling where the judge wrote that a full heart and an empty mind isn't enough, right? It's not enough to just, Teddy Roosevelt once said that, knowing what's right doesn't mean much if you don't do what's right. So I do think it has to start with kind of that full heart. Like, you have to be well-intentioned and well-meaning, but then you can't just kind of rely on that and say, well, we wanted to do the right thing. You have to actually, you have to take that step. But I've kind of started to subscribe to this philosophy that you can't convince the the unconvincible, and you can't sell the unsellable. There's so many plans that are out there that, if given the right vision, kind of the way that the approach that you take,
Sure.
that do have the right desires, they haven't been given the right amount of leadership yet. They haven't had a vision cast for them to really know how they can get well, how they can get healthy. There's so many of those plans out there. Like, advisors can spend their time. If you come across somebody that's not going to take your advice, that they don't really care. I hate to say that you should walk away, but you probably should walk away and spend your time finding the companies who actually,
I do know one of the folks
that care and are willing to do the things necessary,
going through like this process of almost hitting a wall and having to kind of, regroup. And it was kind of this huge aha moment for him, like this huge conversion experience or something. Like so it can happen. Hearts can change. But I can't.
Yeah.
Well,
but you can't do it for him. People
and
have
one of the quotes
to,
from that particular person I'm thinking of,
they have to.
I wrote about was he said
they have to want.
We were talking about how do purpose-driven or conscious capitalism, how do those kind of companies ever become that? And he said, the leader has to go on a journey first themselves, which is so true. I mean, you've got to either hit that wall or come to terms with who you are and what your purpose is. And not everybody's willing to go through that journey.
It's a lot of hard work. I mean, like I said, it's funny as and you and I talked ahead of time and whatnot. The past 9 months for me has been a real, it's been an incredibly life-giving. I would say, like, the first 6 months of 2021 were literally the worst 6 months of my life. The last 6 months have been some of the best. But that journey requires a lot of hard work, a lot of deep work. And if I'm honest, like, there were times where, like, I just wanted to throw the towel in. But if you really kind of lean in and trust the process, it can lead to things you couldn't even envision before. But you have to get, I once saw this really good kind of visual, and it was kind of a graph, right, of about like change management. Like, people start on it's like working out as an example, right? We're getting to the end of the year. Gym memberships and Peloton memberships are probably going to go through the roof. People have these, New Year's resolutions. They're going to start working out the first week in January, and the first couple of times they're going to feel great and they're really fired up. And so you kind of you get that initial excitement. And then you start to go down, and you go in the valley of torture. And a lot of people give up and they say, you know what, I'm going back. It's not worth it. But if you can kind of lean into that, and you can emerge
I'm glad that you've gone through that journey, because I think you're so much better for being on the other side of it. I hate that it was challenging the first 6 months. I would look back and say the last 2 years have been probably the most enjoyable and life-giving and purposeful of my entire life. There's a number of reasons. I first of all, even though we started our firm in 2013, so we're
why do you think that is
practice, so to speak? But I have zero debt, absolutely zero debt. So I've never struggled myself with financial wellness, and so we're going through this challenging time. Who knows in March or April of 2020 what's going to happen? I'm thinking, I owe nobody anything. I mean, being debt free, you experience the pandemic differently. Secondly, as we all know, the market recovered. That wasn't as widely reported in the news. Everybody knew what happened in March. Everybody forgot that by the end of the year, the market was back up over what it had been at in February. And so revenue is phenomenal. We're growing at an incredibly aggressive clip. So 2020 was our best year ever. 2021 was even better. Now I'm almost confident it's going to probably close out better than last year. So we're looking at ridiculous growth. Personally, I think probably maybe I'm just I'm in a better place. I mean, I've got amazing, kids that are moving through college, and that's such a blessing. And, they're healthy. And so just amazing things are happening with the family, with the business. Being able to write has always been a passion of mine. So I actually was a journalist at one point, and there's lots of articles that you could find at places like the Miami Herald and, large newspapers. But that wasn't as life-giving. And now I've transitioned to a different career, but being able to come back and write about that was phenomenal, So it's, to me, I feel like I'm doing what I'm called to do. So this idea of it's definitely a calling for me, and I feel like I have been
that
repurposed, and I can't imagine wanting to not do what I do. Like maybe, when I'm much, much, much older, maybe I want to travel less, but being able to talk to people about their money and being able to help employers make good decisions that are going to help their folks. I can't imagine not wanting to do that. I can't imagine wanting to retire from that. Uh-huh. Well, thanks.
Yeah. So speaking of the book, you are a gifted writer, I think there are two differences.
Okay.
There are people confuse the idea of writers versus authors, right? I would say that what a writer is someone who is really kind of an artist with words. They're a wordsmith. It's novelists, right? It's really good journalists. I think authors are artists when it comes to creating and communicating ideas. Like I'm a decent writer. I think I'm I would consider myself much more of an author than a writer. Given your background about as a journalist, and being a journalism major, like I think when I read through most of your book, because I didn't get through all of it, but as I read through most of it, I think you strike a really good balance of being a really good writer and a good author. And so one of the things I liked about just and having knowing how hard this is I really liked this metaphor, this kind of construction building type of metaphor, which ties into architecture in the title. Why don't you just, as we kind of approach, and start to wrap up a little bit, could you just maybe provide a synopsis?
Well, sure, and it does definitely come back to a lot of design work.
The book, and
I'm an architect.
Kind of the metaphor and the philosophy.
I'm a 401k choice architect. I mean, there's choice architecture, and there's lots of behavioral science that goes into how to properly design a plan. And I kind of feel like what I did was kind of lay a roadmap. Somebody else was saying to me, do you really want to lay a roadmap out there for exactly how to build a plan? Because, you're helping your competitors. And I'm thinking, maybe it comes back to my philosophy in life. I choose to have an abundance philosophy, not a scarcity mentality. And so if you have an abundant mentality, I can be incredibly, happy for your success. It doesn't diminish my success. There are so many people out there that are doing this at a really, really high level. I mean, one of the greatest honors and most humbling things, I guess, really in my career as I've been repurposed was first being selected to be a part of the Retirement Advisor Council, which is like the top 401k advisors in our industry. But even more so, once I became a part of that, I was elected by my peers as the president of that organization. I've been serving as president for the last 2 years of the Retirement Advisor Council. My term ends at the end of this year. There's a lot of people that do this really, really well. Many probably a lot better than I am, but I have maybe a gift for putting it in words. I don't know if I'm able to help other people. I believe a rising tide helps all boats or raises all boats. Sure. Yeah.
And for our industry, when more people Right? Even though there's a lot of people that do it well, it's still such a small percentage of the industry at large. And there's so much business that's actually out there. It's funny. I've often got people, because people the same way with me. Like most of the people who buy my book, both my books, they're advisors, and a lot of times people are like, "Why would you even like? You're making your competitors better." And I've always taken the philosophy the same way. It's like, you know what? Number one, maybe 1% of people, even if I give them my entire blueprint of everything that I do, are actually going to take it and replicate it. And for the 1% that actually does,
well, sure.
I'm so happy because I'm good for them, and I hope it helps them
we're having
succeed,
conversations with a large
it's going to impact more people. And I sense that's
facility
your
in another state. Well. The CFO there had never met me prior to reading the book 401k Architecture. So there is some of that that's going on. We haven't closed that deal yet, but there is this idea. I guess the hope and prayer is that complete random strangers, CFOs from who knows where, pick up the book, read it, contact me and say, "Hey, you're the kind of guy we want to work with." That could happen. I don't know that I would recommend writing a book as part of your prospecting strategy, because it's a real long game. And to your point, probably a lot of the people that read 401k Architecture will be other advisors, and that's fine. I mean, if it helps the industry, but we really do kind of lay out the roadmap. Like, if you're building this, to use the construction mentality, if you're building this thing, how do you lay the foundation? What's the very first step? What's the next step? What's the next step? The very first step is one that probably a lot of folks don't understand. I had a conversation. I would almost call it an argument with an ERISA attorney. And he was dead wrong. I said, "What's the very first step that a company has to do before setting up a plan? I mean, what's the very first thing?" And he's like, "Well, you don't have a plan until you have a plan document." True, but there's something that comes before the plan document. And he says, "Well, you have a plan. You should have a plan document probably before you hire the record keeper." I said, "There's something that comes before that." I said, "Who's going to hire that record keeper?" He says, "The company." I said, "Okay, so who at the company is going to be responsible? Who's going to carry that fiduciary label? Who's going to be personally liable for this?" So the very first step is to set up a retirement plan committee, a fiduciary process, to figure out who's going to be responsible for making these decisions. Okay, you're having a plan document for how the plan works. Who's going to decide whether that plan should allow loans or what, or things like that? You've got to figure out who's responsible. So the very first step, and it sounds so fundamental, the very first step is to set up a retirement plan committee. You'd be surprised by how many places I go into where I'm hired by the CFO or hired by the owner, and the very first thing we do is rebuild their retirement plan committee and put together a due diligence structure, because they'd never had that in place. These are not small companies. There's a law firm where you've got the partners, the managing partners, and they were responsible in their once a year annual meeting for this huge $50 million 401k plan. And it was a very small agenda item on their otherwise busy agenda. They didn't have a separate retirement plan committee. And of course, they're lawyers, so they think they're so smart. But they really had overstepped the most simplistic of things, which is start by setting up this fiduciary structure. So that's what the book does. It just kind of shows you how to lay the foundation. It even gets into how to evaluate different record keepers and things like that. So,
yep. Yeah. No, I thought there's probably some cognitive bias going on here, because I think our philosophies are very similar, and actually, the both books I've written as well, it's kind of the same thing, is like where it's more of like I've always said that I think that nonfiction is actually a lot easier to write than fiction. With fiction, you have to create ideas that didn't exist. Whereas I think with nonfiction around, there obviously is a creative element with what you did. Same with me, but in a lot of ways, I just kind of document what I call document your day. Like I just basically, okay, what were the step-by-step, when I would go into a new plan, what was the step-by-step? What was the foundation? Once we had the foundation poured, what was like the framing for the first floor, then what was the framing for the second floor, and then then we started to kind of close it up, and once it was closed up, then what would we do in terms of like on the inside and the finished work, and then you get to things like paint colors and where a window, where a bay window should go and stuff like that. But it starts with that foundation.
I've heard that story
if
too.
You don't have a good foundation,
right? And there's a lot, and there's a lot of plans out there.
You build your house on sand. When the wind, it's going to knock it down. You build your house on rock.
Don't have an investment policy statement in place. Right? Never even heard of an education policy statement or a disclosure policy statement. They really don't have a proper fiduciary structure for what they're actually doing. And it blows my mind. Now, I guess my bias is maybe that's because they're, they hired their golf buddy. There's a lot of two-plan Tonys and one-truck Chucks that are still in our business that are kind of stumbling around, and we specialize in only working with institutional plans. There's no private wealth management over here. It's our focus. We're very boutique and focus very, very distinctly on what we're called to do, which is 401ks and 403bs.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. So there's obviously a lot of talk within the industry around, and there's a big push right now, and I've been pretty vocal about it on LinkedIn. There's this you've got all this PE money going into the industry. There's a ton of M&A activity. I just read an article that was posted on LinkedIn the other day by, it was reshared by, I think, Eric Daly from Multnomah Group. But there's now, it talked about, I think there are 3 SPACs that have been created now that want to buy up RIAs, and this whole idea of accessing the scale, you need to access the public markets. And I made a comment where I said, I cannot think of a worse ownership structure of a fiduciary focused RIA than being publicly traded and now having to make decisions about the business and about their clients based on next quarter's numbers. Like what a disaster. You've heard a lot now, and there's certain corners of the marketplace that are saying there will be no standalone retirement plan boutique firms, that you have to get into wealth, you have to cross-sell, you have to do all these different things. You've taken a different approach. Let me get your just opinion on that. And why do you think there is, like, what would be your counter to that argument of that?
I cringe with this
from
idea
a profitability
of trying
standpoint
to,
and survival
quote unquote,
standpoint,
monetize
you have to
the
cross-sell
plan
and do
participant.
other services.
I like to serve the plan participant, but I hear that sometimes in certain circles. I understand that certain folks are going to chase the money. I can't necessarily even, I guess, begrudge them for doing what they feel like is, going to provide for their family, and whatever. It's a big paycheck, and you go be you. But we've just never been there, and that's, I guess that's where I kind of fall into that sweet spot of purpose. Like, I've never been that individual insurance salesman. I'm proud to say I've never sold insurance. I was never a stockbroker, and we don't do private wealth management. And so I would tell every one of those folks that's in private wealth management that wants to bleed into our side of the business, just, stay in your lane, bro. I mean, I like when they're separate, and we actually have partnerships with a lot of individual advisors, and there's a major RIA firm that we have actually a formal engagement with out of the Southeast, where they work with individuals all over the Southeast, multi-state region, and we're their 401k solution. So it works for us to stay in our lane and not to bleed into private wealth management. I was formerly a partner at the largest largest independent broker in the world. It's probably not a mystery who that is, but I'll let you guess. Largest independent broker in the world, and we were always told that, hey, you're leaving free money on the table by not soliciting those individual participants for business. But it was just never our business model. Now, more recently, that largest independent broker that was so pure in their model did recently go down that path where they're actually going to cross sell and whatever, go be you. But it's not what we're called to do. I don't know. I'm very content and at peace with kind of what we're doing. Are there more profitable ways of doing it? Maybe. I guess you just have to figure out what you're called to do, really. But I certainly cringe with this idea of trying to monetize plan participants. It's in our industry.
Yeah. Yeah, that story is being told more and more. And like I said, I do think the valuations and what we're seeing with the amount of money that's flowing in, my biggest concern is that it's getting people to start taking their eye off the ball, just because they, especially after, M&A, and I know this won't be popular because, look, at the end of the day, like these are businesses that we've created over time, and that like any business owner, like if there's a way to monetize your business, create value, and that makes sense for you, like I love it. This is America. I mean, that's what I did. But that being said, when you look at the structure of some of these deals and the back end, ways to maximize deal value, but it's built on really aggressive, revenue growth targets, I just worry that people are kind of starting to take their eye off the ball. And I'm of the opinion, just like you, like if you deliver value to your clients, and everybody thinks they deliver value, and some do, and probably some don't, but like if you are delivering value consistently, and you are staying very closely aligned with your clients and you're solving their problems,
sure,
I think you will always have a viable business. I actually think there's a lot of opportunity I'm not of the opinion boutique firms are going to go away. If anything, I actually think there could be a backlash against a lot of this cross-selling, and more employers, once they start to understand, what
I hope so. I was one of those, and there's a lot
for
of
firms
independent advisors,
are,
independent RIAs,
kind of in their lane, if that makes sense.
That was also in this same camp, but I was one of those that was welcoming of the fiduciary rule. I mean, I visited with Phyllis Borsey about this, and she actually had like anecdotal, evidence.
Yeah.
I mean, with family members who had been kind of solicited by some advisors that she felt like were overcharging them once they moved their money out of institutional plans. I think at the heart of it, she wasn't trying to attack our industry, but she was interested in kind of seeing people just stay in their lane. Like if you're an individual advisor, go be a private wealth management guy and be the best. Do that. Don't play in this ERISA 401k world. And if you're going to specialize in 401ks, kind of stay in that lane. That was really what the fiduciary rule I thought was going to take us down. There was obviously a big, pushback from the insurance industry, and that kind of died. And I don't know if it'll be resurrected, but I was welcoming of something that gave some distinction to those in our industry. So yeah, I think maybe you and I are on the same page there. So.
Well, Troy, this has been a lot of fun. I will. I'm put in the show notes. I'm going to put links to your books. I would really encourage people to buy them. I think I haven't read Repurposement, but I think 401k architecture. I think you did a really, really bang up job with it, and just really appreciate your willingness to be generous of spirit, if you will, in terms of your ideas, your philosophies. The work you've done with the Retirement Advisor Council and the leadership from that perspective. One of the things I like to ask at the end of each episode is the whole purpose of this podcast is to help make ERISA fiduciaries smarter. What is your single best piece of advice to someone who's an ERISA fiduciary, whether that's at an employer and they sit on the retirement committee, whether that's an advisor, whether that's part of the community?
So you're saying like to plan sponsors or to advisors?
Be fiduciaries, but kind of support the fiduciary community. What's your single best piece of advice?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm just thinking, if you're an employer, I guess I would take very seriously the
let's talk
idea
about if you serve in a fiduciary
of staying
capacity.
abreast of certain issues.
Piece of advice.
Not taking whatever your record keeper tells you to be gospel truth. I mean, hopefully every plan sponsor out there is reading, Plan Sponsor Magazine, and hopefully you're at least somewhat versed in these different issues. Maybe you're educating yourself. And I think that's probably true for folks that are in the consulting world. I mean, that's what's interesting about it to me, is it never changes. Like, there's so much going on. And so, it's always changing. Did I say it wrong? Yeah. I mean, thank you for correcting me. No, it
never changes, or it's always changing?
It's always changing. It just never gets old, is probably what I meant to say. So yeah.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Okay.
So if I could summarize
like
that, it sounds like,
just bottom line, I think so.
Keep your eyes up towards the horizon and trust but verify. Okay. Nice.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
so where can people stay connected
active
with
on the socials?
If they want to reach out, or they want to learn
it's
more
not
about
always
you,
it's
or
not
what
always
you're
me
doing,
that's
or just
doing all the
What's the
posting,
best
but if it's a personal note, I mean, it's probably me that posted it. So we're on LinkedIn. The firm has a location on LinkedIn, as well as I do personally. I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. I'm on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @Repurposement. The website for the firm is feeonly401kadvisor.com. So feeonly401kadvisor.com. But the books themselves, so Repurposement is the first one, and it's available. Repurposement's pretty easily available on Amazon. I think that's the easiest place to find that. And of course, you mentioned 401k architecture. So that's the one that just came out. Election day actually came out the first Tuesday in November. So yeah. Okay.
Got it. Well, I'll put links to all of that so people can find it. So with that, Troy, thank you so much for being a guest. I really enjoyed the conversation, and just really appreciate all the things that you're doing. And just the way
I appreciate you having me, and really appreciate what you're doing for the industry. I think it's fun to see
both in word and
really giving back to the industry in a role that probably serves the industry even more broadly and bigger than you were doing before, helping other advisors get better. And a rising tide floats all boats. And so I've appreciated what you've done from afar. I appreciate you helping out with the second book. You've helped a little bit with that as well. So thank you.